Only 12 men have left their footprints on the surface of the moon. 2 of them are with us here. Only 3 men have ever flown a crippled spacecraft back to Earth from near the moon. 1 of them is with us. Only 2 American fighter pilots achieved ace status in Vietnam by shooting down 5 enemy aircraft. 1 of them is with us. And only 1 man was the first to fly the world's fastest airplane. He is with us. These 5 men are true legends of aerospace.
It's 1 small step for man, 1 giant leap for mankind.
The man who took that small step and giant leap was Neil Armstrong. He spoke those words on 20 July 1969 as he stepped onto the surface of the moon. He was the first human ever to set foot on a celestial body other than our home planet, Earth. Neil had been a naval aviator who'd seen combat action in Korea and a civilian test pilot in the X-15 before he joined NASA's astronaut program.
Fly me to the moon.
As commander of Apollo 11, Neil, along with lunar lander pilot Buzz Aldrin and command module pilot Mike Collins, blasted off of the moon on 16 July 1969. Imagine a 35-story building being lifted straight off the deck by 160 million horsepower of rocket propulsion, and you'll have an idea of what that launch was like. Despite that, Neil's pulse never went above 109. The linked command, service, and lunar lander modules covered the 380,000 kilometers between Earth and the moon in 3 days, 3 hours, 49 minutes. Average speed, 5,000 kilometers an hour. On 20 July, Neil and Buzz got into the lunar lander, undocked from the command module, leaving Collins to orbit the moon, descended to the surface of the moon. The autopilot slowed the craft with retro rockets, but when it looked like the lander was likely to overshoot its target and smash into a jagged crater, Neil took manual control, found a safe area, and brought the lander, named Eagle, to rest. He had less than 1 minute of fuel left in his fuel tanks.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Armstrong and Aldrin skipped a planned rest period, depressurized Eagle, opened the hatch, and Neil descended the ladder to make history. There are only 5 photographs partially showing Neil or his reflection on the surface of the moon. That's because he, not Buzz, carried the still camera. Neil's reflection in Buzz's visor is the best still photo of Neil on the moon. The crew spent 21.5 hours on the moon, 2.5 of those hours walking and working on the surface. Eagle blasted off from the moon at 17 hours 54 minutes on 21 July and docked with Columbia. They jettisoned the lander and flew back to Earth. The command capsule splashed down in the Pacific just before dawn on 24 July 1969. It's estimated that 450 million people around our globe heard Neil say "one small step" live on radio or television. At that time, that was well over 10% of the world's population.
It's a rock composed of many fragments of many sizes and many shapes. When we return this rock, or some of the others like it, to Houston, we'd like to share a piece of this rock with so many of the countries throughout the world. We hope that this will be a symbol of what our feelings are, what the feelings of the Apollo program are, and a symbol of mankind that we can live in peace and harmony in the future.
That symbolic rock, called the Goodwill Rock, is in the hand of Gene Cernan, commander of Apollo 17, the last man to leave his footprints on the moon. Today, pieces of that rock are in museums all over the world. Apollo 17 also has a long list of firsts and other superlatives. It was the first manned spacecraft launched at night, a spectacular sight. It was the longest manned lunar landing flight. Cernan and Jack Schmitt, the lunar lander pilot, spent the most time on the moon's surface and returned to Earth the largest sample of lunar rocks, dust, and soil. And 29,000 kilometers from home, the crew took this picture, the blue marble, the most famous photograph of Earth from space. Gene Cernan was a naval aviator when he was selected to join the astronaut program. He orbited the moon in Apollo 10 and landed on it as commander of Apollo 17. He was one of only 3 men to journey twice to the moon. Ron Evans stayed in lunar orbit in the command module. Down on the moon, Gene and Jack Schmitt spent 22 hours exploring the surface. Using a lunar rover, they covered 35 kilometers at a barren valley called Taurus Littrow.
You know, Jack, when we finish with station 8, we will have covered this whole valley from corner to corner.
They even tried their hand at auto body work. They fixed the rover's broken fender with a lunar map, tape, and clamps to keep the wheel from spraying dust all over them. And in the moon's low gravity, they played soccer with a lunar boulder.
Just don't stub your toe.
Gene got as close as a human ever will to traveling like a kangaroo.
99, proceeded, 3, 2, 1, ignition.
And when it came time to leave the moon, a color video camera left behind transmitted these unforgettable images back to Earth. An onboard camera showed the lander's descent stage, left behind on the moon. And cameras on the command module and lander recorded the docking approach above the moon.
Good to have you all back up here.
On 19 December 1972, 12 days after launch, Apollo 17 had a